Hello and welcome to another episode of the Small Agency Talk Show. I am Chip Griffin, the founder of Saga, the Small Agency Growth Alliance, and I am delighted to have with me two panelists who continue to put up with my antics, Patrick Rogan of Ignition HR and Lee McKnight Jr. of RSW US. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks.
Good to be back.
And Lee, thank you for bringing the festivity here to what is our last show of the year. It is nice to hear. We'll solo you, Lee, so that you can show off the fact that you've got the. I mean, should I call that a holiday sweater or an ugly holiday sweater, or what are we? Yes. Okay.
Is that the abominable snowman?
Yeah, that is.
What?
Is that the abominable snowman?
Yeah.
Ooh.
It is.
Nice.
I'm telling you, I go all out for this show.
And Lee, we appreciate that, and based on our pre-show conversation, I have no idea where we're headed. Probably straight off the rails, but that's okay. You have to be able to have a little bit of fun, and this is the fun part of my work week because we get to talk about some serious issues, but have some fun doing it. So, so today, actually, Lee, you didn't just bring the festivity; you actually brought the information. So we're going to have you talk a little bit about some research that you guys have done, and we'll react to it and see where that takes us.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And thanks again for having me back. So we released our 2021 Agency New Business Report about 4.5 weeks ago. And yeah, it's gotten some interesting pickups online and some interesting feedback. And I think the biggest takeaway that we saw was just this explosion of organic growth, from agencies over this past year. It was the actual stat, I believe. Within the question, it was, and it was a broad category to be fair, but the question was, what tools are you finding that are helping you drive the most business or most new business? Organic growth, I guess, is not technically a tool, but that was part of the question set. And it was 71% of agencies said that was the main driver for them, and so many other of the potential answers kind of paled in comparison. And we weren't overly shocked. I mean, we're talking to agencies every day and see that. And I think then I'm going to be quiet. But part of the other takeaways that came from that, though, is we're looking at more and more of these questions. What we're seeing is, and look, this is not a new thing. Cobbler's children, agencies have always had a tough time driving new business, but seemingly they're not doing it at all over the last year. And part of it, to be fair, is time. With so much organic growth, there's, especially for small and mid-sized agencies, right? I mean, there's only so much they can get done when, if this client is throwing all this work or, hey, we need more help, what do they know? So what we're seeing, though, and we can go into some of these other stats, I won't dish them all out right now, but that agencies aren't pursuing new business. And there are some other factors that, and not to be doom and gloom, and it is self-serving given that, we handle new business for agencies, but it's going to bite them, I think, because we know if nothing else that our industry is cyclical. Mm-hmm. And all this organic growth is not going to stay at the rate it is now. I mean, I hope it does for all these agencies' sake, but too many just not, I think, planning for, what they need to be planning for in terms of new business. So that there's the shot across the bow.
So I think it's interesting because organic growth is certainly one of the best kinds of growth, I think, that most agencies can have.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you don't have to invest as heavily in getting your existing clients to pay more. You know them, so hopefully you're able to price it correctly. And I guess that is the one challenge with organic growth is that if you're in a cycle where you're trying to raise your prices and increase your profit margins, that's a little bit harder to do with organic growth because they saw what your price list used to be. So that can be a challenge, but it's a great way to do it. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily the gift that keeps on giving, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And what we're hearing and what I'm hearing consistently is, and I know, and we touched on it prior to jumping on live, another factor in all this is the hiring piece, which I know you all have talked about in previous shows. But that definitely is a factor. I mean, I've got folks I'm talking to that say, look, about our services, I see the value, fantastic. We need this, but right now we don't have enough AEs to handle the work we have now. We've got to get some more folks in here before we can whether it's through you all, RSW, or through our own efforts internally. So it's interesting, to kind of see where agencies are now and kind of where they're going to be.
Well, and Patrick, obviously you work with a lot of agencies on staffing and talent issues.
Sure.
How do you counsel them to deal with this? On the one hand, they certainly want to be growing the business, but there's no certainty when you're pitching new business, and so you have to be ready for it, but you don't want to jump the gun. So, how do you advise agencies to deal with that resourcing issue?
Yeah, the one word that stands out with this whole talent acquisition piece is inertia, and what my clients have seen and experienced to their detriment at times is the fact that if you slow down the recruiting machine or stop the recruiting machine, to start it back up again takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And what I always recommend is that even in bad times, never stop recruiting. Like, continue, even if you can't hire someone today, establish and keep a conversation, keep a dialogue going. If there's synergies between your agency and an individual who is either at another agency whose needs aren't being met, or maybe works for, inside an organization and they're interested in moving into the agency world, that doesn't have to be a, we're going to hire you in the next 2 weeks conversation. It can be, let's keep a dialogue going because we might see something for you in the future and there's some synergies and let's explore them. Keep those conversations going and share tidbits of successes that you're having and new things that you're doing and other things, just to kind of keep people interested. That way you have sort of a broad area of talent that you can tap into. And keep in mind, those same people who may be a fit for you but aren't a fit for you now could be a great source for someone else who could be a fit for you now. And that could be another reason to have a touch point in a conversation as well too. Those are some of the things that I'm seeing right now a lot of. And oh, by the way, don't lose the ones you have.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Oh, retention is key. And I think we had that conversation not too long ago.
Yes.
So Lee, we've got talent as an issue, both because it's a tough talent market and because agencies don't want to invest in staff before they have the business. So you got the whole chicken and egg thing. So taking a look at it from the new business perspective, how do you advise clients to manage their new business process so that they're not taking their foot off the gas, but they're also not overpromising on what they can't actually deliver from a resource perspective?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's it gets, I was going to say it gets complicated, but staying on the hiring for a moment and feeds into your question. Specifically, we saw another question we had in this report that we asked agencies, and it was around hiring for the new business director position specifically. That's down. It's at its lowest level since we started this survey report in 2010. Weirdly, though, we followed up with, well, the last new business hire that you made, were they how successful were they? And the percentage was much higher that, well, they were actually fairly successful. Yet you're not hiring for the position. So I think part of it is just maybe availability and the fact that new business directors at agencies tend to last for 18 months, and if they're good, grass is always greener. They tend to jump around. But so I think that feeds into, and I actually had an agency principal. I wrote a blog post on that specific stat. And he brought up that he's the owner, for them and their, staff of like 12. And he said, we've tried, it hasn't worked. And as the owner, I feel like I need to be a part of that machine that drives that new business. And that's always kind of the interesting take. And even with our own clients about how much those partners should be involved. And the answer is generally we feel they should, but for that agency owner, or the partners to try to drive that train ongoing, so difficult. I'm preaching to the choir, to everyone watching into YouTube, right? But I think that has fed into it too with this organic growth. And like when you ask, how do we kind of counsel about taking foot off the gas? I think, one of the things is, number one, same that Patrick just mentioned with hiring, it's easy for me to say, but you can't take the foot off the new business pedal either. One of the stats that also should be a little alarming for agencies is referrals, which when we ask that question typically every year, referrals are always the top driver for new business. That was usually number one. This year was organic growth for the first time ever. But referrals are down now 3 years. Over a 3-year period, it has dropped only 4 or 5 percentage points over the last, 3 years ago, then another 2. And then this year, I believe it was another 12. So that's kind of interesting because, okay, if you aren't able to depend on referrals, and by the way, even when someone works with us, one of the things we always say is, look, this is a 3-pronged strategy. It could be more than 3, but in the sense of, yes, you've hired us to handle your outbound new business. Referrals and organic growth, obviously you need to drive that too. That doesn't go away, and it shouldn't go away for you because you got to have all these avenues open, right? But with referrals seemingly going down, they're telling us they're going down. That's going to be kind of a I hate to use the word perfect storm. That is so bad. You should both punch me for saying it, but you can. All right. But it kind of is, and there's some other stats I'll throw out here in a minute that kind of add to that. So again, the organic growth is great. It's not doom and gloom, but it's just agencies have got to wake up moving into this new year to make sure that it's a manageable is the key word, because so many agencies will go out of the gate when they try to handle new business on their own and they go gangbusters. We're going to buy all these tools. We're going to build all these lists, build all this content. You all know they're a month or so in, they're like, okay, I'm exhausted. I can't do this. It's like, because they just bite off more than they can chew. And it really is about as much as you can handle, but you got to keep it steady and consistent, So I think that's a long answer to your question, but
that's okay. We've got 30 minutes to fill here, Lee. So, whatever you can do to help get us across that goal line is fantastic. So, no, but I mean, that's really interesting. And I'm curious, the seeing organic growth increase, I think logically just makes sense based on I don't think any of us are sitting here saying, oh, that's shocking.
Right.
But the drop in referrals, how do you account for that? I mean, that does seem odd to me.
Quite frankly, that's a great question. I wish we weren't expecting that because in conversations I'll have with agencies on a more or less daily basis, hiring would come up. The fact that they need to drive more new business would come up. Referrals never have. That's in that drop, and it's been increasing, which is what's odd. And I don't know if it's just. I think you have to throw COVID, and we talk about it in this report, into almost every answer, that it's just a time of weirdness, not to take away from how serious it has been for a lot of people, but it is. It's a very weird time, right, in that sense. And I think that I'm wondering if maybe that referral machine just kind of slowed the way that new business and some of these other factors have. But it is, I actually do want to go back, and I'm starting to ask, I haven't done it yet, but I kind of have it on to do as I'm having these conversations with agencies, throwing that out there to them, and I'll report back. But no, I really do. It is odd, and I think something else that we saw from this report was the guerrilla clients, like kind of making a comeback. That kind of makes a little more sense because of the time factor, and we kind of started in the conversation. I think it was, a 12% increase from last year. We asked agencies, does any one client you have represent 50% or more of your client base? And up from last year, it's that the answer was 29% of agencies that answered said they did, versus 17% last year. That's a decent sized jump there. That's alarming as well, right? Because you never want to be in that position. I mean, it's during COVID, hey, we have to take this work for a lot of these agencies, and we'll figure out how much they represent as far as our client base later. We got to keep going. But I think now, I hope agencies will be able to take a step back because they try so hard to not let that happen. That kind of creep is just going to continue if they don't, again, start with that new business, process.
Yeah, and it's sort of a toxic combination, right? If your organic growth is leading to new guerrilla clients, and at the same time you're easing off on soliciting new business, now you're putting yourself in a really risky position. And Patrick, I'm curious on your take from a talent perspective. How do you address the elasticity that you may want from a business perspective for labor costs, which is typically the largest cost for most agencies.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So how do you address that, particularly in an environment where you've got some uncertainty about broad economic issues and health issues and all that kind of stuff. You've got the uncertainty of having a guerrilla client that if they decide to go away, now all of a sudden we need to really adjust things. But at the same time, you've got government stepping in and making it more difficult to use independent contractors.
Yeah.
So how do you advise clients to navigate that mess?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there's no simple answer. I do typically recommend where they can to have a balance between either full-time staff, consultants if they can hire them. If they can't, so like, okay, so the big problem is California with hiring consultants right now with the Rfps rules. I mean, it's just it's impossible, really. So, but what you can do is people who you used to hire as a consultant, you just hire on an hourly basis, so you can still make it happen. The good news is if you have a chunk of your population that are full-time, long-time employees you want to have for the next 10 years, if all works out well, and you also have a chunk of your population that are freelancers or hourly employees, that does give you a little bit of flex. It gives you a little bit of cushion. You balance that with some relationships you have on the outside for people who you can bring in if you need to flex upward, or freelancers you can let go of. You need to flex downward. That seems to be helpful. I don't think there's any like perfect answer for that. I think you have to constantly work it.
Does there need to be education of both agencies and some of their consultants / contractors that being a part-time hourly employee in lieu of being a 1099 really isn't the end of the world in most cases? I mean, because I think there's this fear on both sides that, I don't want to go down this path. And so, unless you're in a state like California where, it's just black and white, and if you're hiring a 1099 in California, you're fairly crazy.
Yes.
But other states are starting to get in on that act too, and
Right.
trying to be more aggressive because they see it as a revenue opportunity for them largely. I mean, let's call a spade here. So how do you go about that? Is it an education process, or should they still be sticking with 1099s as much as possible?
Well, I recommend, if you can legally stick with 1099s, to do that. The thing that surprised me in California, I have two agencies that I've worked with there. One I'm currently working with, and I expected the transition of straight freelancers to hourly consultants who are W-2 employees to be actually much harder than it was. I mean, there's been some pushback. There have been some people who've kind of said, no, I can't do that, and I won't do it. But it's kind of working. The other thing that works in their case, and again, I'm not providing legal advice because that's not what I do. I just do the HR thing. But what I am
None of us are, just to be clear, no legal or accounting advice or anything like that. We're just a couple of dudes randomly opining about things.
Yeah. So I have seen agencies hire 1099 consultants in California when the consultants are outside of the US. That seems to work pretty well. And there's some pockets of talent out there. Argentina is a good pocket of talent I'm seeing in the agency world. And in different parts of Europe and around the world, there's different pockets of talent that tend to work out pretty well. So that's another example I've seen people do. Kind of surprised me a little bit that would not cause problems, but again.
Well, and a lot of times when agencies are hiring that kind of talent, they will often go through a company over there that then handles the subcontracting, so that can clean up things a lot. So you're not dealing with an individual in one of those countries. But I mean, like you, I've seen a number of these places. Costa Rica comes to mind for me as one place where I've seen some real quality outsourcing taking place, and so you can find those opportunities.
Right.
I'm not sure it fulfills all the needs that agencies have, but it's important to look at your resourcing issue as a collection of different options, and no one is the only answer.
Right. I totally agree. And the one caution I will recommend with the international ones, I'm not saying it's a hindrance, but double check internet reliability. I got burned once with that. So
you got that time zones. You obviously need to be considering carefully.
Sure.
You can use them to your advantage, but they can also be a challenge as well. So you need to think through some of those issues. But all right, Lee. Well, back to your research here. Let's hit on some of the other nuggets that you've discovered.
Yeah, one that will make everyone here want to take a nap and pass out is, and this is crazy. So So when we did this survey, it covered the first 3 quarters of the year, as far as what we were at, the time frame we were asking these agencies about. One of the questions was around RFPs, and as far as how we operate with our clients, one of the things that, and when I'm telling an agency who's interested in our services, I always like to point out at some point, look, we don't see our job as chasing RFPs, for the reason that most agencies don't like them. Having said that, we don't ignore them, because we understand, especially there are certain verticals where you're going to answer this RFP if you're going to work with us, right? But the response, there was 2 that I thought were crazy. Over the first 3 quarters, it was 51% of agencies said they had answered 5 to 10 RFPs to that point. 18% said they answered 10 or more, which I think is just absolutely crazy. And just
it's
that
stupid.
Oh God, that hamster wheel, the blood, sweat, and tears, non-billable hours, and the time. I thought that was crazy. So if you add that into the mix, and I feel for these firms, if they're feeling like, again, if there's certain verticals that higher ed be one of them, right? But otherwise, so they're on that hamster wheel along with, who has time for new business when you're filling out the RFP phone books, that it's a cattle call anyway, the incumbent's waiting in the wings. So that was one that really stuck out for us, and that was much higher than past years.
I mean, that's interesting that they're stepping back from the smart tactics and focusing instead on the low value ones, in my view. I mean, I just, that doesn't make any sense to me that you would do that. I mean, and if they're responding to 10 or more RFPs, I mean, their win rate has to be even lower than normal for RFPs, which is usually about 0. So I'm assuming it's in the negative number. Yeah, I'm very negative on RFPs, obviously.
And I I literally talked to one agency 3 weeks ago who was just interested in how we worked, and he said, I'll be honest with you, this is fact finding. If we do anything, it's going to be first quarter. I totally get it. He said, really, we're thinking that our plan is just to go the RFP route first quarter and see how that goes. That was literally their whole strategy for new business. And I said, I know this is, I said previously, this is really self-serving. I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, are you crazy? Your people are going to kill you. I'm like, I don't get it. I don't think that's a sound strategy. And he begged to differ. So, but it was very bizarre.
Check back at the end of the quarter. My guess is he'll come around to your point of view.
if they're not committed, or they've moved on to gardening, it's very odd.
I do not understand the fascination with RFPs, really, on either side, because you don't tend to get good relationships out. I mean, who wants to pick someone based off of this laundry list? Nah, forget about it.
But isn't it like paying ransoms? The more you do it, the more demand there's going to be for them. Can everyone just get together and say, we're just not going to do this, and that way no one will ask for them anymore?
Well, see, I mean, here's the thing, and the reason why agencies continue to do RFPs is because it's like a lottery ticket, right? And so when you win them, they feel really good, and so even though it almost never happens, you keep doing it. Unfortunately, most RFPs are far less profitable than any other business that you're bringing in. So even when you win them, you get these big top-level revenue numbers, but what you're actually contributing to the bottom line ends up being usually minuscule.
Yeah, and Patrick, I'm going to steal that from you, by the way, the ransom thing. I love that. I'll give you credit, but I am going to use that.
Make sure you send him royalty checks, Lee.
Very, very little, really nothing, but or some Stockholm syndrome version or something. No, I don't get that. And what else kind of fed into, again, smack me, this perfect storm, so cliche to say that, but is the traditional outbound tools, which, to be fair, can be low sometimes. When we ask about tools, that organic growth being so high, at the rock bottom. And it was interesting, not terribly shocking, but it was so low this year versus others. So we asked agency the traditional tools, and all of these were under 10%, some as low as 3%, except for email. But phone calling, traditional like mailings,
right,
social even, were all at like 3%, 4%, and 6%. Email was only at 20%, which is saturated. We all know that. And I think it's just, again, showing that these agencies aren't doing any kind of outbound, it seems, at all. And I think to be fair, a lot of those tools, I think, it's interesting as we're not out of COVID at all, right? But the work from home, email deliverability issues, and how much harder it's getting now to break through to folks. Especially these larger companies. Just talked to an agency the other day who has some larger clients, more of a medium-sized firm, and had a little bit of luck with DuPont, but was telling me that so they won't. It's impossible to break into there, and there's plenty of companies like that today where they won't accept, and you have to go through certain steps to even be your email to be admitted, into their stream, if you will. So I do understand, and LinkedIn, right? It's the parking lot now. I mean, it's getting worse and worse every day.
It's terrible.
Cold LinkedIn selling, which we talked about on one of these before. I know all of those tactics or all those things I think are building up so that agencies, I do think, and they told me, are feeling kind of, I won't say despair is too strong a word, but they're frustrated because they're thinking, okay, I'm not breaking through. And to be fair, usually it's because they're not being consistent. They give it one or two tries and kind of give up, and they think, this isn't working. It's like, well, wait, you don't even know if it's working. You've only given it,
right.
a little bit of time, which again, easy for me to say, but it's, so I think it's a combination of both those things, but it's interesting again, that we're just kind of seeing all these different stats feed into that, again, that lack of overall pursuit, of new business.
So, I mean, we could go on for hours about this, but we're creeping up on the end of the time that we have here. And so I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, and that's referrals. And I think referrals get a bad rap. They are, I think, actually an excellent way to grow your agency.
Absolutely.
Folks who say, you can't, if you're just growing on referrals, it's a problem. Well, yeah, if you're just growing on referrals, maybe it's a problem, but it should, throughout the life cycle of the agency, it should be a major driver. So
yes,
if we can agree on that, and if we can agree that the numbers that you're showing are concerning, and so people should be boosting those referral percentages up and head it in the other direction, how do we do that effectively? And in particular, I'm curious, how do we use our teams to help with the referrals? Because we often think in terms of ourselves as the owners or the principals of the business, but really the referrals, our whole team can be in on that effort, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the part of my answer, and first, and we say this to our own clients and to agencies I'm talking about, I think part of the reason why referrals are down too, now that you asked, and at first I said I don't know, but I do think it's because now maybe I do now. I don't know. It's the
okay.
Christmas.
All right, you've learned in the last 20 minutes. I mean,
yes.
That's what this show is all about. It's about improving knowledge, and apparently we've improved your knowledge somehow in the last 20 minutes. So.
Yeah. Well, now that I've lost all credibility, I'll keep going.
But, go for it.
But in all sincerity, I do think that part of it is that a lot of these firms, they don't have any kind of strategy behind it. That's the first thing.
Yep.
You've got to have a strategy, and that sounds like kiddingly, but really they don't. So I think that's the first step, is just how are we going to do this? But then to further answer your question, Chip, you bring up an excellent point. And we've with our own content, we've talked about this, is establishing an agency-wide culture of new business. I mean, and there's a lot of agencies that are very good at that, but a lot that they'd like to think about it, they're busy, or maybe they haven't at all. But that, when you look at what are your AEs doing, in terms of trying to help expand that organic growth, but it needs to be all the way down to every team member in our, as far as how we see it, because you never know. And I think establishing some incentives, around referrals, because you never know where they might come from, and even folks who have left the agency. But I think that having that strategy and presenting it to the entire team so that they know what you're doing is driving new business, even if you don't touch it every day. And it is a little bit harder when you have folks in media or, art or whatever it might be. But you can do it. I know a lot of agencies who have, and it's worked very well for them. And it also just, you let everyone know that you are all valued and important here, not to get all kumbaya, but that's an important thing. And so I think establishing that strategy and how you're going to, and some of it doesn't all have to be monetary either. A lot of it, what drives people maybe is not necessarily monetary. I mean, obviously that's critically important, but I think those are some things generally that we point out.
And I love that you say it has to be part of the culture. I think a key problem in generating referrals from your team, and frankly from yourself, is that you're not clear about who your ideal client is. So you can't, in one or two sentences, say, here's what I'm looking for. So, if you're having lunch with somebody, or you're on Zoom and you can say, hey, we do our best work for, and you can describe really clearly who it is that you do your best work for, the size of the company, the location, the type of business they are. And that really helps people to go through their mental Rolodex and give you a valuable referral. And so if you're just saying to your team, hey, we're expecting you to try to generate some referrals, that's a problem. You've got to be clear. We're looking for, and tell them that. And so, Patrick, as you're telling your team what you're looking for, Lee mentioned incentives. What are your thoughts on incentivizing your non-traditional biz dev people to bring in business? And is that effective? And if so, how do you shape it?
Well, I think the first important step is to have a biz development person and not just your role as the owner. So many times I see with agency owners, they just try and do too much. And once you get up, you mentioned about 12 is sort of the magic number in agency size. If you have 12 people in your agency and you're the smartest person in the room, if you're the most creative person, if you're the best copywriter, if you're the primary salesperson, and heaven forbid, if you do all those things, you're in serious trouble. It means you're not hiring people who are smart enough. So I think it's important to kind of broaden a little bit and make sure you kind of make sure that you aren't running the whole thing. It might be your baby, but make it sustainable. Let it run on its own. In terms of the biz development people specifically and incentives, I think a lot of incentives should be driven by what's going to motivate that particular individual. It's great to say we need to do a compensation plan that's going to give someone all they need to be successful in your company, but it may not be compensation. Maybe there are other pieces that are more motivating to them. It could be work life. It could be vacation time. It could be other benefits. Just kind of keep in mind what's going to motivate your employee before you do some cookie cutter approach in terms of how you're thinking you're going to give someone incentive to bring in new business. Maybe it's being part of a team. Maybe it's working with you. Maybe it's a promotion. There could be a whole host of other things that can drive someone being successful in your organization. But the most important step with biz development is make sure you have someone else doing it other than you.
Great point.
And that is a great note to wind up on here, since we're already gone a little bit over the 30-minute magical number that I try to go with. But hey, we don't pay by the minute for the airtime, so and Anderson Cooper is not going to step in here and take over anytime soon. So we can just keep going as long as we want, but we're not going to. So Lee, thank you for sharing that information. If someone wants more information about the research you've done or the insights that you provide, where should they go?
Yeah, that is available, that report that we've been talking about, for free at rswus.com. And there's a resources tab, and you'll see the reports right there.
Excellent. And Patrick, if someone wants some help navigating the talent morass that exists out there today, how should they do that?
Sure. I'm easy to reach. I'm at ignitionhr.com. You can click the little button on the right to schedule a time to talk if you'd like.
Excellent. Of course, you can find out more about Saga at smallagencygrowth.com, and you can find replays of this episode and any other episode of this show, the Agency Leadership Podcast, and all sorts of other things at smallagency.tv. So, Patrick Rogan, Lee McKnight Jr., thank you for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. I wish you both the best holiday season, and I look forward to having you both back here in the new year. Perhaps not with the sweater, Lee.
All right.
but a prop. You have to. You wore the sweater today, but I expect a prop the next time.
You will.
So,
oh, yes.
Excellent. So with that, everybody, I hope you all as viewers have great holiday seasons and an excellent end of the year and a great start to the new year. And I will see you all in January.
Thanks, Chip.